In previous videos, we have used many tools to deploy resources on Kubernetes. We have used terminal tools, graphical tools, automation tools, and today it feels like we are going the next step. Hey everybody, this is Christian, and in today's video we will take a look at Argo CD, a continuous delivery tool that automatically deploys Kubernetes applications and resources from Git repositories. I've tested this tool now for a couple of weeks and it entirely changed the way how I'm managing my Kubernetes deployments now. It's really amazing. And of course, I want to show it to you. We will deploy Argo CD and a Kubernetes cluster, connect a Git repository and use it to deploy an application. We will also talk a bit about continuous delivery in general and how it fits into a modern software development processes and DevOps, which is in my opinion an extremely important topic in IT these days. So I hope you will enjoy this tutorial and you can learn something useful. Before we start, I also want to mention today's sponsor Tree, which is another fantastic open source DevOps tool that we will also use in this video to validate our Kubernetes manifests, so we make sure we have no config issues in our files. But before we do that, I want to give you some more background about Argo CD and how it fits into DevOps processes, because believe it or not, it's not only important to know about the tools, but also instead to see the bigger picture and understand why we're actually doing all of this. Let's first start with continuous delivery, which I've already mentioned in the beginning of this video. That's what the CD in Argo CD stands for, by the way. When we talk about continuous delivery, we also need to talk about continuous integration. These two terms are often used together and are also shortly called CI/CD. Both are part of DevOps and the goal is to shorten and optimize the software development process life cycles, so they are often used together in one coherent development process. This graphic, which I bet you have already seen somewhere, shows how these separate processes fit in together, while the left side mainly covers continuous integration processes and the right side covers continuous delivery processes. Continuous integration aims to optimize the coding, building and testing of software, so whenever an application is deployed, CI tools can automatically compile the program and test if there are any bugs, issues or security vulnerabilities. And they can also lead into continuous delivery processes, so whenever a new version is released and should be deployed on an infrastructure, CD tools can help to automate that. That's exactly where Argo CD fits into the whole CI/CD process of DevOps. When you want to deploy an application in Kubernetes, you can use Argo CD to automatically do that. You just need to create a Git repository where you push your Kubernetes manifests to, and Argo CD can then automatically watch on this specific Git repository and deploy all these resources. This can be done manually or even fully automatic. There are of course many different DevOps and continuous delivery tools out there that do these things. Argo CD is just one of them. But the part that I like so much about Argo CD is that it has a very intuitive web interface, so it's easy to use while you still have the option to use CLI tools. Overall, Argo CD seems to be a very versatile solution, and that also might be the reason why you often see this in the DevOps world. It's undoubtedly one of the most popular tools for continuous delivery on Kubernetes. But I know it's always more interesting to see it in action than just talk about it, so let's start installing Argo CD in my demo Kubernetes cluster and use it to deploy a simple test application. By the way, if you enjoy watching my videos and you'd like to watch more content for IT professionals and home lab enthusiasts, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. That would be so cool because it's telling YouTube to push this video out to more people and it really helps the channel grow. To install Argo CD on Kubernetes, you just need to follow the official documentation on the Getting Started guide. First, you have to create a new namespace Argo CD and then apply the installation manifest in this namespace. If you'd want to skip the installation of the web interface, you could also use the second command here. Then you can only use the Argo CLI tool to administrate it, but I personally don't see a reason why we would skip that. The web interface is really useful, so we're using the first command that will just install the full Argo CD deployment. The next step describes how to install the Argo CLI tool for those who want to use a terminal tool instead of this web interface. We are not doing it in this tutorial. Yeah, maybe this could be a topic for an upcoming video. The following step instead is something you want to have a closer look at, because by default Argo CD does not expose itself with an external IP. But that's of course needed if you want to access it from outside the cluster. So here you have a couple of options, and what you should use now depends on your setup. The documentation describes how to change the service type to a load balancer, but I will instead expose it with an ingress controller. I'm already using traffic on this demo cluster that has some advantages because I can get a trusted SSL certificate and a hostname on my local network. That's what I want to do. ArgoCD has a pretty great documentation page called Ingress, where you can find templates for Nginx and traffic. So here I will just copy the template for an ingress route. That is what you can use in traffic. I will just change the hostname to match it with the DNS name in my home lab, and I also want to create a new trusted SSL certificate managed by Cert Manager. By the way, if you want to know how to do that in your local Kubernetes cluster without having a public DNS record available, I've recently made a tutorial about self-signed certificates in your local network on Kubernetes. I will leave you a link to that video in the description down below. And let's add this new certificate secret to the TLS section of the ingress route. So that should be all. Let's now apply these two files. Okay, so the website returns something, but it's still not working yet, because when you make ArgoCD accessible via ingress, you will likely run into this same issue. The website will show too many redirects when you're accessing the website. When we inspect this response in a terminal tool like curl, you can see the website https ArgoCD wants to make a temporary redirect to the same address. This is what's called an https redirection loop, and that can happen in some cases when the application that your reverse proxy is redirecting to is not aware of the reverse proxy in front of it, and it tries to make another redirection to the same address. So the reverse proxy makes a redirection to the pod, and the pod makes a redirection to another address. That's picked up by the reverse proxy, redirected to the pod again, and then it's going on and on forever. It's an infinite loop. The only solution to this problem is to make sure the application is aware of the proxy and turn off the redirection. And here the ArgoCD documentation describes a very simple solution, that is to start the ArgoCD server with disable TLS, and that will turn off the redirection. What we need to do is we just need to edit the deployment manifest of ArgoCD's server with this command. This opens up a simple text editor. Notepad might not be the best editor to do these things, but hey, it is what it is. Let's go into this section, and that's described in the documentation, and add the insecure flag in the containers command section. So now we just need to save these changes and close the Notepad window, and the deployment should be restarted now with TLS turned off. And if we now reload the page, you get the login page of ArgoCD. We have now a valid certificate for it. That's perfect, and everything is ready. Now we can log in with the username admin, and the password should be either the name of the server pod, so just get all the server pods in the ArgoCD namespace and copy paste it. However, in my case that does not work, but there is another command where you can get the initial password that might also be the case. So you just need to query the content of the secret object that's holding the initial password and pipe this into a base64 decoder, and then we also get our password. So when we now log in with this, it's working, and we can now administrate ArgoCD and start deploying our first application with an automated continuous delivery process. It took me quite some time to go through the documentation and fix the problem with the HTTPS redirection loop, but I would always do it right and use an ingress controller like Traffic or Nginx to expose services on Kubernetes. It's just so much better because you get a trusted SSL cert, and this setup you can absolutely use in a production system. And this is the web interface of ArgoCD. The main view shows all applications that you have deployed. Of course, this is still empty because we haven't added any projects yet. And in the settings view, you can do some general configurations. For example, when we need to add a Git repository where ArgoCD pulls down the Kubernetes Manifests from. Apart from that, you can also configure certificates here, keys, additional Kubernetes clusters you want to manage, and add projects or accounts. Okay, cool. So we now have deployed ArgoCD in our Kubernetes cluster, and we can start adding a Git repository where we upload a demo project that we like to deploy. If you don't have a Git repository yet and you just don't know where to do that, you can just get a free one on a public Git service website, something like GitHub or GitLab. I personally have all my stuff on GitHub, and I have created a new example project in my Git repository videos where you will find all of my example files. What's cool in Argo CD, you don't need to create a new Git repository for every application. You can also just create one Git repository that you call apps, for example, and then you can put every application in a separate folder. So in my Git repository videos, we have a folder called Argo CD tutorial. This is where you will find all the necessary files for this video. Let's copy the project URL and go back to Argo CD. In the web UI of Argo CD, let's go into the settings menu and then add a new Git repository, paste the URL in here. If you need some kind of authentication, you can also add a username and password or TLS certificates, but because this is a public Git repository, we don't need to add it. Once Argo CD connects to the Git repository, you should have as successful in the connection status. So now we can create a new application in this Git repository. Okay, that was the preparation part for this example project. Let's now open this Git repository in VS Code and create a new folder here where we want to add our Kubernetes manifests for a test application that we'd like to deploy. I've thought a lot about what we should actually do here, but honestly, you know, I just like to deploy Nginx Web servers as an example. That's probably the easiest project you can deploy. Let's now do this, and I will copy the necessary resources in a manifest file called apptest1.yaml. So let's start with the namespace object because we need a new namespace for our test Nginx application. And the next part will deploy a simple Nginx Web server in this namespace. Nothing too special here. We also need a service object, of course, with the type cluster IP because I want to put this behind a reverse proxy. So I also added an ingress object that now makes it available on the hostname apptest1 kubedemo1 in my local home network. Okay, cool, so that should be everything. I want to deploy it for now. Let's first validate this manifest before we upload it to the Git repository to avoid any mistakes. I will use a free and open source tool Tree to validate it. And by the way, if you're new to Tree, you can get more information about it on the website tree.io. It's a terminal tool that you can install on Windows, Linux and macOS and check Kubernetes manifests against best practice rules or security policies. Here I want to test all resources against my new demo policy, which I have just created to do a few basic tests, and these are all successful, so I've not done anything stupid here in my YAML file. That's good. Just a few words more to the tree. I've created separate policies here to check my manifests in different environments like production, demo and testing, because in production setups I want to be a bit more restrictive and follow all the best practices that are useful, like resource limitations, health checks and so on. What's also pretty cool, you could even automate this step in a CI process, for example with GitHub Actions. That's something I still have on my to-do list, so there might be a video about GitHub Actions and that tree in the future. I hope that will be interesting as well. But for now I've just done it manually, and because we have our manifests now validated, everything is okay. Let's now push this to GitHub. So just add a commit message in VS Code and then push it. And that's everything. So now you can see in GitHub the files are there. Argo CD should be able to find them. Let's now go back into Argo CD and add a new application to automate the deployment of these resources. What we need to do now is somehow tell Argo CD to watch this repository and how to apply the resources. And that's done by creating a new application in the web interface. Let's give this application the name apptest1 and add this to a project. And now we have to choose how changes will be deployed, manually or automatically. I'm going to select automatic here, and there are also some other options how you can fine-tune the update behavior of your resources, for example auto-create namespaces and other things. However, we won't go into too much detail in this video. Let's now scroll down here because we need to select our Git repository that we've added before in the settings and enter the path. So just like I told you, an application can deploy all resources in just a specific folder. Let's copy the folder where I've placed the manifest file for our project resources in and paste it into the path field. And of course we also need to select our Kubernetes cluster and the namespace where we'd like to deploy our resources. Okay, so that should be all. Let's save this application, and once you have saved it, you can see a new application where Argo CD immediately starts deploying the resources. It only takes 1 or 2 seconds and the application seems to be healthy already. When you click on it, it opens up a detailed view where you can see all the resources and the relation between them. For example, here we have the service object, here the deployment, the replica set, and the actual pod. You can also inspect details of these objects. So here you can see the manifest and the live manifest, so what is present in the file and what's actually the status on the Kubernetes cluster. You can even quickly open events and logs from the pods, so you get a lot of information about what's actually happening in the background, and that is visible in a nice and intuitive interface. I absolutely love it because it makes the complex architecture of Kubernetes somehow easier to grasp. When you're working on big projects with large deployments and manifests, it can get quite overwhelming, and this graphical view of the resources definitely helps to stay on top of things. That's something I'm missing in a lot of other Kubernetes tools. They give you a lot of information, but a diagram like this makes it easier to understand. But I also want to show you another cool feature, the automatic synchronization between the Git repository and the Argo CD application. In my opinion, this is a real benefit of CD and GitOps where it gets interesting. Because our application is now deployed, we can access the Nginx Web server in our browser, but as you can see, we get a certificate warning here because I missed to deploy a trusted SSL certificate. Let's now fix this by adding it to the manifest file, and here I will create a new valid certificate that is managed by Cert Manager and add the TLS secret to the ingress object. So here we have created a new Kubernetes resource and changed an existing one. That should add a trusted SSL cert to our project and get rid of the browser's warning. Let's first validate these changes in the tree again. You can see everything has passed the test, that is good. And because we have created our application in Argo CD as automatic, we just need to commit this change to GitHub. So add a commit message and push it to the main branch. Argo CD should now monitor this change and apply it automatically. When we now check the application on Argo CD after a few seconds, you can see that it has automatically updated the deployment. Here is the certificate resource that was added and a corresponding certificate request. In the logs, everything seems okay as well. The cert manager is managing this certificate. It was successfully applied to the ingress object. Let's now go into our web browser and open a new request to the Nginx test page. And that's it. As you can see, everything was updated correctly. We now got a valid certificate for our test deployment. This is really, really cool. But my excitement doesn't stop here, because if you think about it, because we're using a Git repository to store our deployments, that means we can't only apply upcoming changes, we can also use all the benefits of Git. For example, if we have applied a change and it turns out that something does not work, we can simply revert the changes in the Git repo, and then Argo CD reverts the changes as well on the infrastructure. And everything is documented. When you're working with other people on a project, you can see who has made changes. You can make pull requests that are reviewed by other people. You can document everything. That is the real power of GitOps, in my opinion. And as you can imagine, Argo CD is not everything in this space. We will cover a lot more tools and Git features in the future, just like I mentioned with CI pipelines, GitHub Actions and so on. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you are too. But that should be all for now. As always, many thanks for watching, everybody. I will catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.